All set.
Well, I'm really excited for our conversation today on the Limitless Leadership Lounge. As always, Coach brings in some of the great guests, an athlete, somebody who's really into personal growth, and an author as well of a book that Coach is going to share a little bit about. So, without further ado, Coach, go ahead and introduce Damon today. Let's dive in.
All right, Damon, great to see you again. And he shared his wonderful book called Learn It All Leader. And I'm just going to share a little bit about Damon. He's done some wonderful things. Damon Lembi is the CEO of Learnit, a global leader corporate training solutions that has upskilled more than 1.8 million professionals in the past 30 years. Damon lives in the San Francisco Bay Area and loves books, live music, and above all, spending time with his wife, Cara Mia, and his two kids, Luciano and Walter, as well as his dog, Pablo. So Damon also was a Division One baseball player. We may get into that a little bit. He played at Arizona State and he's done a lot of good things in the world. So Damon, welcome to the Limitless Leadership Lounge.
Well, it's an honor to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, awesome. So, David, one of the things that, I got from your book, and we got a chance to talk once before the podcast, is how much obviously you're into learning. So, our goal is to help young and emerging leaders. What would you say to the young leader about the power of continuing to learn as you move forward?
Well, what I would say is the reason why I got into learning was I ended up in this position as CEO. I kind of worked my way up from sales, teaching. And when I got into a leadership role, I said, the only way I can be super successful here, just like when it came to baseball, is to be continuously learning, receiving feedback, trying things, failing, getting better. And so, what I would say to the emerging leaders that are listening out there today is that learning is one thing, right? Reading books, listening to podcasts, but just as important is putting it into action. There's a great quote out there that I didn't come up with it. This guy named David Katz did. It's learning without doing is treason. So don't go from book to book to book and not do anything. When you're reading a book or reading this podcast, listening to this podcast, think about what are the takeaways that you really believe in and how can you apply that to your personal and professional life?
Renuma, you're muted. Unmute.
Sorry. You're so right that learning is one of the continuous learning is one of the traits that good leader have to possess, but also unlearning things. I have experienced that I have to unlearn so many things, becoming a leader. So definitely both learning and unlearning goes hand in hand. But it was interesting that you have such a unique position as a baseball player and a leader in a corporate learning space. How do you, or what are the elements of baseball that you have translated into your leadership space as you are growing into another different transforming leader?
Well, first, I love that you brought up the part about unlearning. I think that is super important. I talk about learn it alls and know it alls. Know it alls, they got it all figured out all the time, right? A lot of times, it's really important to let go of certain things to be able to try things differently, especially now when it comes to AI. There's different ways, processes or whatever. So you have to unlearn certain things to
Right.
have a beginner's mind, to innovate really. So I appreciate you saying that. Now to answer your question, and I'm sure Coach would say the same thing, and several of your other guests, of course. I call it the athletic education. I mean, for me, it was like the best experience possible, and not just college baseball, but high school basketball and everything else I played. There are so many skills that you learn playing in sports that can translate into your professional life, whether it's perseverance, whether it's feedback, which we talked about. Coach, think about all the times you gave people feedback on how to shoot free throws or how to take a charge or whatever it is, right? So those are skills right there that you can apply to your real life. And then in baseball, especially failure. I mean, 7 out of 10 times you get out, you got to get back up and you got to do it again. I call it learning
Mm,
agility. You got to learn
right.
what you did last time and move forward. And so a lot of times, part of my story is that when my baseball career ended, I was kind of went through an identity crisis. And I said, I put all my eggs in one basket. I wanted to be a Major League Baseball player. And I thought that was gonna happen. When my career ended at 22, I said, I don't know if anything that I've done my entire life is transferable into the real world. And what I soon found out is that it's all transferable. And that goes for, if you're an accountant, even, and let's say you lose your job or you want to pivot your career, those skills you learned can be transferred into your new career.
So
And
true.
so for me, my whole background of sports was a game changer when it came to what I do now in the professional world.
Yes.
Mm,
So it's
perfect.
learning is everything. And this is why I was excited for this conversation because I had some questions. That's something you already touched on, but the transferability of knowledge and information. Now you touched on, I don't remember that quote. Can you share that quote again? Something about how learning but not doing is treason.
Learning without doing is treason. I mean, that you should steal that one. Every time I say that, people love it
Yeah.
because it's so true.
Yeah, and
Mm,
that's what I was actually going to ask you. So you kind of went ahead, you beat me to it. But we go to conferences, us people who want to learn and develop ourselves and grow personally and professionally. We go to conferences and we come out with pages and pages of notes and all these great speakers. We just spent 3 days away at some big conference and spent a gazillion bucks on it, but then we don't really get anything or change anything besides those pages and pages of notes that we stuff away in a desk drawer somewhere. Learning is great, but my only skepticism, I guess, is how do we avoid falling into that trap? Because that just seems so easy to do.
Well, what's not easy to do is actually learn. Learning itself I think it's difficult, right? Because like you said, you go to a conference or you take classes at Learnit or you listen to this podcast. Behavior change is difficult. And what I mean by that is it takes practice. It takes intentionality and consistency. So you go to 3 days worth of conference, pick out, maybe 4 or 5 bullet points of what really impacted you and figure out how you could apply that to what you're doing. And learning also takes courage, right? It takes courage to try things differently. And a lot of times learning doesn't stick, quite frankly, when, from all these customers I've talked to over the years, because sometimes people don't want to change. They're
Mm.
comfortable the way they are, right? And just like, whether it's losing weight or becoming better at shooting free throws, it takes practice, it takes intentionality. And that's a lot of times why people go to conferences or they take classes, and then 3 months later, they couldn't tell you anything from that conference.
mm.
Good point.
And I just wanted to jump in and share that I was so resisting using AI for last 2 years. I said, no, I won't be the one who will surrender to AI. I will do my own stuff. And then I tried with like just developing a discussion questions or something like that for the students, and it was unbelievable. My life, my task, like I could manage so many things. So I had to open up. I did not compromise with my authenticity, but I'm also accommodating AI and I'm relearning so many different tools. There are Copilot, Gemini, and this and that. So playing around with all those things. And we can accommodate new learning and we can grow better. So even if it can be fearful, but if we can embrace it, I think we can go to new heights.
I just want to
So,
say, for your listeners out there, if you're not leveraging and diving into AI, you're stacking the odds against yourself, like it or not. I mean, it's not going to go away. It's at its worst it ever is. It's only going to get better. And there's so many ways that you could use it when it comes to learning instead of just writing emails. I mean, for example, every time I get done on a podcast, either as a guest or a host, I'll take the transcripts, I'll throw it into a GPT I built, and I'll have it give me feedback. What did I do well? What could I do differently? I'll role play with it. I use AI to challenge some of my decisions that I make at the office, or maybe even counter arguments against with my wife. Whatever. I mean, there's so many different things in there.
right.
And what I challenge everybody to think about. My company, we got about 50 employees, and I probably drive them nuts with the AI stuff. Is I say, let's get curious, and I want you to think about how can we do this different and better by leveraging AI. That's how I want every opportunity and decision. And again, not to lose your authenticity because that is super, super important, but it needs to be your thought partner and go right alongside with you. So I think it's a very important
Mm,
point you brought up.
right.
You mentioned, and I was curious, you mentioned decision making a couple times.
Hmm.
And my curiosity is because as a leader, you got to make a lot of decisions. And I believe you have a process on how to be a more effective decision maker. Can you share that process to help these young emerging leaders? Because they're making decisions all the time, he or she, and we want to be better at making those decisions.
I mean, in a recent McKinsey study, only a couple years ago, it says that leaders spend at least 40% of their time making decisions. Okay. So if that's the case, that should be one of the number one things that you're working on and getting better at. I wrote a decision making book called Good Decisions Equal Success, but there's plenty of other great content out there. Shane Parrish, others. It's so important. And there's all kinds of different decisions, super important decisions that can have big impact, all the way down to what you're going to order for dinner. And so, what I talk about in my book, I use a story in chapter five. John, you might even be too young for this, but I threw a party for Axl Rose and Guns N' Roses, and I had to make a
Oh,
decision
my
if we're.
favorite brand.
Oh, come on! Now you're my favorite. I
Yeah,
mean,
I love them.
yeah, and so there's a situation happened there where we didn't know if the water was going to work, so we had to make a decision. But I use a term, and it's called purposeful awfulizing. Okay, and so what I mean is a lot of times when we go into the decision, early on in my career, I made a big mistake. It was the dot-com days, and everything was going well, and I just kept thinking about how great it would be to open up more offices, in downtown San Francisco, San Jose, Arizona. I put on rosy colored glasses. Purposeful awfulizing, what I should have done is look a year or 18 months out and think to myself, what is the worst case scenario? Like, if everything falls apart, if the dot com crashes, which we all know it did, could we survive that? And if you can't survive that, then go back to the drawing board and make different decisions, right? But if you can, then go for it. Move forward on that decision. That's one process that I use, Coach Jim. Another one is, for instance, if I get asked to do a keynote and maybe it's a big audience and I'm unsure if I'll do well, I do what Sir Richard Branson says, and I just say, screw it, let's do it. I just say yes, and then I figure out afterwards, right? And those
Mm,
ones where it's like, so I can't get myself out of it. One more
right.
recommendation that I have, I talk about this in my book, but I think it's really important, and you could Google this and find it. Um, Shane Parrish again, I got it from him, is decision journals. Whenever I make big decisions, like we went from an internal accounting person to an outsource firm, at the beginning of the process, I wrote down why we were doing it, what could possibly go wrong, why we were doing it. And I take those kind of decisions and I reflect back on them over time to see how they went. And it just helps you again learn. So, Coach Jim, I really appreciate that question because decision making is vital to being a leader. And I think really to all of us.
Right. Yeah. And who likes a indecisive leader?
Mm-mm.
None of us, there are, I have seen so many leaders like, should I do this or shouldn't I do that? I don't, I think I will change my mind. And we become frustrated. People who will work under those indecisive leaders, they become frustrated. So we need to have those knowledge to make those decisions. So it is, as Coach pointed out, and Damon, beautifully, you provided us with those tips. While I was going through your LinkedIn, I saw that you are also working on collaborative team, developing collaborative team. And I have found out like nowadays, so many people have so many different ego. They have personalities, characteristic. Then the new generation, the Gen Z, they just came from the post-pandemic scenario where they were in their house all the time, and then suddenly they're in the workplace. So many dynamics is working out. So in this acknowledging all these things, what are some tips to like build that collaborative team when you have different generation, personality, ego, all these things are working together? Are there some strategies that you use to create that team?
Well, one thing I want to close the loop on decision making, you don't have to have all the knowledge yourself. Great leaders, great teams surround themselves, and this kind of ties into your question, with a diverse group of talent with different strengths, and then you can kind of always get ideas and thoughts all across the board. So as
Right.
a learn it all leader, so to speak, is you don't have to have all the answers. You just need to tap into the people around you and always be curious. Now, we have like 5 different generations of people in the workforce, and I think Coach and I might have talked about this before, but I'm always curious to see what athletic coaches have to say about how the generations have changed over the years and kind of what's the same.
Mm.
Now, to how to get people to be cohesive or collaborative, first and foremost, I think it starts at the top. It's modeling the behavior and the values that you want your team to have. I think that's very important. You can't ask people to show up to the office and then you never show up to the office. You can't ask people to read books and participate in learning if you as a leader don't do that as well. You can't ask people to accept feedback if you always get defensive sometimes people to give you feedback. So one is modeling the behavior, and two, and another tip is I think you got to be what people call a chameleon leader. That is, get curious and get to know your team and adjust your coaching style. It's not a one size fits all. I
Right.
coach, I just remember when I was playing, some of my best coaches, they would treat me differently than they would treat other players on the team. They knew that they can yell at me if they wanted to, right? I mean, because I could handle it, but others you need to maybe be a little bit softer with, or whatever. And that's the same thing. Not that you should yell at people these days when it comes to corporate management leadership, but I think you need to adapt to the individual. You need to be curious and understand. Everybody's giving the Gen Zs a hard time. I disagree. I think there's some great ones out there,
Right.
for sure, that we can learn something from everybody. I mean, technology wise, they're way stronger than we are, right? But they can learn from the baby boomers, with all the experience. So model the behavior and also that there's strengths. Everybody has strengths and different views. And finally, you just can't treat everybody the same. Get curious and be a chameleon leader.
Mm.
Yeah. And how about you mentioned some mistakes that you made, and we just want to humanize you because people are
Mhm.
like, well, this Damon guy is great, but your success in leadership wasn't, as you mentioned earlier, without its mistakes or challenges. So could you just share a mistake or two to, for one thing, let us know that you're human, just like
Mhm.
all of us, even though you are very successful, but also tell us a little bit about how you propelled off of those mistakes into the success that you enjoy today.
Well, thanks for saying I'm successful, but I'll tell you, I've made so many mistakes, and a lot of people say that, but I have absolutely no problem sharing those mistakes and taking ownership of them as a leader. So across the board, I mean, just overall, if I look back on how I did things 10 years ago or 30 years ago, I was just like, oh my gosh, why would I do that? But some of the
Mm.
biggest ones, I mean, some of the biggest mistakes that I made was over expanding. Back in the .com days, I didn't listen to my dad, who didn't work at Learnit, but he was on the board. That was a huge mistake. And if I didn't have the financial support of my family at the time, I we wouldn't be here today, right? So that was a huge mistake. Another big mistake I made probably 5 years ago was I really wanted to bring on a COO. I was interviewing this guy who went to Stanford. He looked great on paper. He used to work at Google. And a couple of the people on my executive team, they're like, well, let's put him through maybe a 3 month trial or a deeper interview process. And John, I didn't listen. I just said, I'm going to do it. And I hired him. And he was terrible.
Mm.
Maybe he wouldn't be terrible at a different role in a enterprise company, but for Learnit, he was a bad fit. We've tried technology rollouts that I spearheaded that didn't go well, and product releases that didn't go well. So one thing I can say to your audience is that leadership in any type of career, it's not linear. You're not going to just go like this and everything is going to be
Right.
great. You're going to have, it's like a roller coaster. And the best thing you can do is you can learn from those mistakes. And what I like to say, try not to make the same mistake over and over. Learn to make new mistakes.
Mm.
Damon,
Exactly.
your company Learnit works with a lot of leaders in different trainings. So I'm curious, from all those different trainings, if you could zero down to two or three qualities that, as a young leader, you really are looking to implement into your life, what would be those two or three qualities that you've seen of people that are highly effective as leaders?
So the qualities, it's a little bit more than two or three, but number one is humility. To me, that's the gateway to everything. If you're not humble and if you have a big ego, if you're not afraid to make mistakes, you got no chance in my book, I think, So I think humility is number one. You got to have character. Coach, if I wasn't 10 minutes early to practice, I was late, right? If you got to say you got to do what you say. Don't overpromise, underproduce. I think character is so important. I've talked about it a couple times. Curiosity. We just talked about it. You got to be curious all the time. Open to ideas. You got to have courage to try things. And then also, I think confidence is a big trait to have. But the only way, in my opinion, you get confidence is putting in the reps, shooting 100 free throws, finding ways to have those difficult conversations. Reading a book and trying to implement something. Confidence comes from action. So again, I'll just say them real quickly. I think that's humility, character, curiosity, confidence, and courage.
You struck a chord, so I got to delve into one thing because in reading your book, one of the books that you really recommended in your book was called "Questions Are the Answer" by Hale, I think is Gregensen.
Mhm.
And I'm curious because I kid leaders, I do a lot of leadership presentations, and I say they should be the CQA, the Chief Question Asker.
Mhm.
So, if you were to zero down to that book of curiosity? Could you give us maybe a couple examples of powerful questions that you would recommend leaders use?
So yeah, and that is a good book, but that was a couple of years ago. I came across a new one. I interviewed this gentleman on my show named Jeff Wetzler, who wrote a book called Ask, which is I think even better. And
Okay.
so and he's got all kinds of different questions that you could ask, and because a lot of times what he talks about is I think to be a great leader, you got to ask a lot of questions, and you got to make people feel comfortable to share what's really on their mind because it's tough sometimes, right? If you're a leader, sometimes people might see things, but they're afraid to tell you, right? They're afraid to give you feedback because if they feel like you're going to get defensive. But if you ask in a way and people feel heard, I think that's very important. One thing, here's a simple question that I think is really important. When you get done with any type of conversation on a one-on-one, just ask people, what else? Is there anything else that you'd like to talk about today? That's a good one. I have a problem of at the end of after explaining something, I'll say, does that make sense? Which is a very
Mm.
close-ended question. Instead, say, how did that land with you? What are you thinking about this? So it's keeping it more open-ended, but I can't recommend that book Ask enough. There's so many great questions in there. But also, when it comes to asking questions, put your phone down, stop looking at email, and pay attention. Because there's nothing more rude and disrespectful, I think, than ask somebody a question and you're typing on your phone, right? Because if you do that, people won't feel heard, they won't feel connected, and most likely they're not even going to give you what they're really thinking.
Mhm. And Damon, I was wondering, what are the challenges do you think the teams in different corporate environment or in any environment are facing now and in the upcoming future? What are the things that you are observing? Because you are also coaching so many corporate sectors. What are some common things that you have observed, the challenges they face?
Well, I mean, there's a lot going on right now, right? There's
Mm,
uncertainty in the workforce. There's political uncertainty. There's AI disruption. There's multiple generations. I mean, so we see a lot of that across the board. I think one of the biggest ones is the AI disruption. What's going to happen
mm,
to my role? That MIT study which came out a couple months ago said 95% of AI projects fail. I think part of that's because people are sabotaging the projects because they don't know, like, if this project works, am I out of a job?
Mhm.
And so across the board, there's all these things going on. And the best thing you can do as a leader, I believe, is to be as transparent as possible. It is you may not have all the answers, and that's totally fine. Just be humble enough to say I don't have all the answers, but try to be as transparent as possible and share with people what's going on. As far as how it relates to your work and in your everyday life, because if you don't, people will start making up, thoughts in their head, and they'll be thinking to themselves, okay, well, I'm definitely going to get automated out of my role here. But that may not be the case, right? So
Right.
share with them what's going on and be open to hearing what people have to say. But yeah, this is across the board. There's all kinds of crazy stuff going on right now.
Yeah,
Mm.
and in leadership, it just underscores the need even more to build trust. And that was something I was going to ask you. And what we like to ask a lot of leaders and leadership consultants and authors like yourself, building trust, such a key. I think everybody would agree, right? As Coach says all the time, everybody thinks, trust is important, but how do we actually do that is a whole different thing. Our actions don't always align with our words that say that building trust is important. So, how do you build trust within your teams?
Well, I think what's most important to understand when it comes to trust is that trust is earned. It's not expected. So just because I'm somebody's leader and they're starting at Learnit or whatever, I can't just expect them to, I have to earn their trust. And that is showing up on time, doing what I'm saying I'm going to do, and also having their back. Uh, Coach, I remember I played for a gentleman who, I mean, he won National League Manager of the Year. Doesn't matter who it is. But when I played for him early on in my career, if things went well, he took all the credit, and but if things didn't go well, he just pushed out the blame on everybody else. And I would say to myself, if I ever lead anybody, I'm never going to be like that, you know? Um, and so I think it's important. Shine the spotlight on your team when things go well, and then have their back if things don't go well. And John, if you do that and you say what you say you're going to do, and you realize that you need to earn their trust, to me, those are all ways to truly gain people's trust. And then you also create an environment where it's not a paycheck, kind of job where people come in, get their paycheck and leave, but they actually feel like that they're part of something bigger than just, a paycheck every 2 weeks.
Mm.
I was looking at some of your videos, Damon, and one that was curious for me was because communication is so essential in leadership, right? And there was an acronym OARS, OARS. Uh, can you share a little bit about that and helping people be more effective communication?
Well, I'll be honest, I don't even know what it is. Or
Uh,
is it, I think it's probably one of the models that we built through Learnit.
yeah.
But here's what I will say, and my chief learning officer will get so mad at me for saying that, Darren Bridget. But just being honest, on the spot, I don't know. But what I can tell you is that if you're not a great communicator, or if you're not learning to be a better communicator, then it's going to be very difficult to be a great leader. I come across so many people who have great technical skills, right? I mean, and whether it's in sales or engineering or science or whatever it is, but they can't communicate their ideas. They don't have empathy for others. They get frustrated because, like, why can't this person understand what I'm saying? So, for all you listeners out there, do whatever you can to become a better communicator. It's so, so important because you can have all the ideas in the world, but if you can't get them across, then they fall flat.
Yeah. Yeah. And communication, public speaking is feared more than death in some studies say. So tell us a little bit about, because I know communicating, we're talking about more than public speaking, but you are a public speaker and you have to be in your role. So tell us a little bit about how you became a better and more confident public speaker.
Practice. I wish there was a different way to put it, but practice and feedback. Give you an example. Prior to my book coming out, I was always kind of, and this is 2023, I was more of a inside CEO. I mean, I would go on sales calls and and I do big presentations in front of my team and everything, but I wasn't out there that much on podcast. I have never done any podcasts, or I did very few speeches. But once my book came out, and I got some good feedback, I started jumping on the podcast trail, and I was absolutely horrible. My first podcast I was on, I think it was Talent Development Think Tank with Andy Stork. Don't go watch it. But I said to myself, I want to get better at this. So, John, I got on every podcast I could, And then I would ask for feedback. I'm really lucky. I work with a bunch of wonderful individuals who teach public speaking and executive presence, and they would give me pretty harsh feedback. But I keep deliberate practice. I'd get better and better and better. And like I said earlier with the screw it, just do it, I took on speaking gigs like one at the Naval Academy where I thought to myself, I mean, can't they find somebody better than me for this? But I said yes right away. I worked my butt off and I think it went well, you know? And
Yeah.
so the only way you're going to get better at anything, I believe, is through practice, but coaching helps as well because think about it. I'm not a big golfer, but if I went out to driving range and I wasn't my grip wasn't fantastic, and I'm out there practicing the wrong thing, you're going to end up having bad habits. So having a good coach or going through training, learning different models, but then doing it over and over and over again, John, I think is the best way to become a better public speaker.
So I think we should put that the link to that first podcast appearance down in the show notes. How does that
Do
sound?
it, do it, do it. Andy's now a really good friend of mine, and I've been on the show multiple times, and he loves telling people that I was his first but podcast guest. But you know what? I don't care. I'm telling you guys. You know what I mean? It's like
Yeah.
Right.
going back to making mistakes. I want to show people that
Mm,
I still have a lot of room to grow. Right? We all do,
mm,
and it's
right.
okay not to be perfect.
Yeah. So it's
Mm,
ultimately about putting in those reps, right?
All
And
about putting in reps.
yep.
I mean, I don't have a Harvard degree. It's great if you do, or an MBA. I just put in the reps. I just show up and do the work.
Yeah.
But I have also seen a few Harvard leaders who have the degree, but they don't have the right attitude. And when you have a bad attitude, it's like a flat tire. It won't take you far. So that is why sometimes the degrees won't also lead you that far if you don't have the right attitude. And definitely you are, and because you're a Guns N' Roses fan, you have all the attitude in you.
Well,
So,
first of all, I'm going to steal the flat tire and attitude. Okay, I'm gonna use that again and again. And you're not going to get out of the show without telling me your favorite Guns N' Roses song. So think about it. Okay,
oh,
and
I have it in my head.
okay.
That's
Well,
November Rain.
okay. Mine's Mr. Brownstone, but I love November Rain and Patience
Oh,
and
yeah.
all of
And
it.
Sweet Child of Mine.
There we go. I love one of my favorite bands. Well, it is my favorite band. But what I try to do is hire whenever possible for attitude and aptitude,
Mm,
instead of experience or degrees, when possible, right? I mean, you can't hire a COO or a CTO who doesn't have any experience. But I think that one of the things that's been great about Learn It over the years is I give people a shot, an opportunity that maybe they wouldn't get it somewhere else,
right.
but they're individuals who come in, their values are aligned with what Learnits are, but they got the attitude and aptitude. They're not afraid to fail. They're not afraid to ask questions, to ask for help. And we recently, earlier in June, had our 30th anniversary party for Learnit, which is crazy, 30 years. But a lot of these people came back, and some of them are CEOs or CTOs at Autodesk or founders of companies. And they'd always say, "Hey, Damon, you gave me my first shot. And maybe I just played a little bit of a role in this, but that makes me so proud to be part of their journey." But all those individuals, I could just see something in them. I could see that drive,
Right.
just like I'm sure Coach has over the years with players. Like it's those people who are leaning into the conversation and instead of just, kind of like this.
It's interesting, Damon, and I'm going to make you think a little bit on this
Um,
question. But before I say that, it's interesting because I coached for 30 years. I had two guys that played pros, one in a minor league pro, and one actually played a couple years in the NBA. But the interesting part, I tell this story that I had them both in physical education class, and when we did the cardiovascular they gave it their best shot. Like one of them was a little bit older and it was the mile run and he won the race. Okay. And then the guy that ended up playing the NBA was towards the end of my career. And we had what they called the pacer test, which is basically you run a 20 meter and in every like 8 seconds, there was a beat, but then it's sped up. and majority of the students would drop out early because they just didn't want to give their best.
Mhm.
And Anthony was like 6'6", 230, and he did 110, which is right with the cross country runners. I mean, it was like, but the interesting part is their drive was different. Not that I didn't have a lot of other players that had drive, but theirs was just above and beyond what pretty much everybody else had. So it was a very interesting point. Now I got to delve in because I know that you dedicated the book to your mom and dad, Lucy and Wally.
Mhm.
And so I'm going to take you back. Tell me a favorite childhood story of something you would experience that helped you become a better leader today. Maybe you learned from your parents.
Well, my idol was my dad, who unfortunately passed away, and 2000, about 15 years ago from cancer, and he ran a bunch of different pretty big organizations, from savings and loans to real estate companies and everything, and but he was going back to what John talked about, he was just an everyday guy. He was just an everyday guy who would just show up. But I would love, Coach, sitting in the back of his shareholder presentations or company meetings, and he just had these moonshot goals and these big dreams, and he just inspired people, and he just stretched them to believe bigger. And I just couldn't be more proud. And he'd always do fun things too. I mean, we'd have Joe Montana was our corporate spokesman, and Joe DiMaggio, and he loved sports, but I got so many great memories. I just remember we were an underdog in a soccer tournament, and we had two games in the day, and we won the first game, and my dad gave this big speech, to us about how we're going to do it. And then we had like a 3 or 4 hour break, so he actually drove us, and I think we went and saw like Rocky 3 in between, you know.
Oh,
And it was kind of less about what he was saying and just more about how he was saying it, and just inspired people to really see more than what they even thought they were capable of doing. Good question.
beautiful.
Thanks for making me think of them.
Ultimately, Damon, I know you've learned so much, and that's what you do is try to encourage others to continue their learning process. So I gotta ask you kind of an overarching question here as we wind down the show. 22-year-old you, your
Mhm.
baseball career is winding down. I'm sure you have a lot of goals and dreams, but still a lot to learn. What would you tell your 22-year-old self if you could go back and talk to him right now?
What I would tell my 22-year-old self, if I can go back and talk to him right now, is that don't worry about what other people think about you. That was a big thing for me. When my baseball career ended, I kind of wanted to just hide. I didn't want to go to the local bars over, Thanksgiving, and people ask what happened or anything like that, because we're not the center of everybody's universe. Early on in my 20s, I passed up pretty good opportunities, because I was afraid of failing. And I'm far less afraid of failing over the last 15, 20 years than I am now, once I realized that you don't get anywhere comparing yourself to others, and who cares if you fail? You could learn something from everybody.
Well said. Well said. And I got to ask you a follow-up that has nothing to do with anything, but
Yeah.
how do you feel about conference realignment? I mean, can you imagine playing for ASU in the Big 12?
Yeah, I think it's nuts. I think what's going on in college sports overall with the NIL and the transfer portal, and I just think it's look. I do feel like the players should get paid to some degree. I mean, they make so much money off of them, but with everything that's going on, and you look at teams like Cal and Stanford that have to travel all the way across the country, for their games, it's kind of out of whack.
Yeah,
What do
yeah.
you
And
think?
geographically, it's kind of weird that you got Cal and Stanford in the Atlantic Coast Conference.
Yeah, I
But,
don't get it. Yeah.
do they even teach geography anymore? I don't know. But
No, I
so
don't
you're
know.
telling me you didn't make money back in the day? You're playing baseball. You did it just for the love of the game?
Yeah, I mean, I wanted it. I loved it. I wanted to make my dad proud. I was kind of good at it. I was a high school American, and I enjoyed it. And I loved it when my family would come out, and my parents would drag my three siblings across the country, all over the place, to watch me play. And I was really, really proud about all that. And when you're pretty good at something, it feels good. And then I hit a home run in the College World Series, which was like my wife says, like your glory days. And it was just so much fun having family there, and it was really good times, you know. And that team, talking about teams, that team and the parents that were on that team, and we had this really special bond, and I think that's why we got all the way up to finishing second in the College World Series, was the great camaraderie that we had with each other.
Yeah. Wow.
Damon, my final question for you is, because obviously I was a coach for a long time in athletics. Can you just share us one quick story of from something you learned from, it didn't matter what sport, but something that really struck you that you learned from one of your athletic coaches?
Well, I'm just going to share the story that coach that I talked about in my book from Andy Lopez, when because I started off at Pepperdine University and went from being a high school American drafted by the Atlanta Braves. But once I got there, I was pretty intimidated. You know, I was a little paralyzed. I was like, everybody's as good as me. I didn't, you know, and I was I had dealt with a lot of imposter syndrome and limiting beliefs, and I didn't do well in the fall practice. I had a full scholarship. Um, and so I went into Coach Lopez's office for our first performance review, and him and I are still in touch today. And before I even had a chance to sit down, he said, "Son, when we recruited you, we did so because we believed that you could be a force in the middle of the lineup and a great D1 baseball player, and most likely even play minor leagues and potentially make the big leagues. But after 90 days of seeing you on the field, I don't think you have the talent to even play Division 1 baseball." And he sat back, crossed his arms. I wanted to either start crying or just crawl in a hole and get out of there. I didn't know what to say. And before I had a chance to say anything, he leaned forward and he pointed at me. He said, "This isn't what we think about you. This is what's going on in your head. We think you have the talent. You can be a great hitter. You have the ability, but you need to work this out in your own head and get and push past this imposter syndrome and limiting beliefs. We can't do that for you." And I'd like to say I left that office and immediately turned things around. I didn't. I got hurt. I ended up leaving. They won the College World Series, but that always stuck with me. That always stuck with me is that you got to push through those limiting beliefs and that imposter syndrome that everybody out there has. And so
Yeah.
that's one baseball story that's really been a game changer for my life when it comes to walking into a situation where you don't know if you're good enough or not.
Good
Yeah.
point.
One of the reasons or one of the ways to push past that, I know, is by continually learning. And that's something you're passionate about, Damon, and continual personal growth. You got books, you got everything else that you do with your organization. Tell us a little bit more how to potentially get in touch with you or at least check out some of your work.
So I've got a podcast, the Learn It All podcast that Coach Jim's coming on. Can't wait to have you pretty soon.
Hey.
Yeah, connect with me on LinkedIn. I like to post on LinkedIn, even if I don't know what I'm talking about. The OAR, please put that in the link. I got to check that out. So LinkedIn, Damon Lembi. And then for you listeners, you know, I'll send you a link to this. But if you go to learnit.com/free, you get 45 days of free training. So check that out. And you take classes in AI essentials or difficult conversations or whatever it is you want. And of course, my book, the Learn It All Leader.
All of that down in the show notes to go check out. 45 days. That's a really generous offering, Damon. What can we learn from that? What can we expect to take away from that trial?
Well, I mean, I would look at what skills do you think are most important for you right now in your role or a role you're trying to get, and I'd focus on that. I would go in if you're a new leader, I highly recommend you take the giving and receiving feedback class, the difficult conversation class, how to run better meetings. I would just start right there. They're all 2 hours. They're live, and we have them in all different time zones, and those are just classes right there. We also have stuff like Excel. If you just want to get, I mean, if you just want to get better at Excel or learn Copilot, we have classes right there on all of those.
45 days, again, down in the show notes. That's how you can get that.
Do it.
Damon, thank you so much for your time. We were really looking forward to this conversation and learning more from you, and you definitely delivered. So we're honored to have you on, and we appreciate your time today.
I had a wonderful time. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.